You so much, and thank you for having me here today. It's really exciting. The whole sort of festival, I think it has been a fantastic opportunity to bring a lot of people together worldwide, and celebrate 20 years of the Agile Manifesto. I'm not feeling old yet. That's cool. That's a great thing. And yeah, just to give you a bit of background about myself, most part of my career, most of my background has been primarily on managing projects and delivering solutions to customers, adhering to some extent to the values and principles of Agile. And when we look into this, it's not necessarily just thinking about how we run software development for the organizations that I've been in, but it's also looking into these opportunities where we use the process to help improve as well the agility within the business. So what kind of conversations we need to have in the future with product teams, with finance in the way that we're doing business cases, and even human resources. So it's been quite varied through my career, and I've been doing a lot of coaching. But I guess most recently, so it was back in 2019 when I returned from maternity leave that I had the fantastic opportunity to join Thomson Reuters Labs. So this is the global reaching innovation arm of Thomson Reuters, where basically through focused research and rapid validation of potential solutions and lots of knowledge sharing, what we try to do is to support the organization and the customers to kind of understand how they could implement new technologies to the businesses. And when we say the businesses, we're even looking into internally as a business, what areas can we sort of improve on and therefore provide better services to our customers. And like Thomson Reuters, there are many organizations that have gone through a transformational journey towards business agility. Some are ahead of others, some have had the challenges. Of course, when there are lots of like restructures, it's like sometimes going back to square one. But the good thing is that I guess that everybody recognizes that being more agile is the only way kind of forward if you want to survive in an ever-changing and highly competitive marketplace. However, we still observe there are many companies struggling with the successful implementation of more innovative ideas, and particularly those that require like the implementation of AI-driven technologies, especially these technologies that are like still evolving, constantly evolving, and lots of learnings from like different like research organizations and so forth. So part of what we do at the labs is to work collaboratively across the different sort of segments that we have to identify and risk and hopefully activate future-ready opportunities within AI, machine learning, data science, and other emerging technologies. So with this context and for today, and the spirit of the 20 years of the Agile Manifesto, what I wanted to do is to use the opportunity to have a conversation around the learnings and observations, not only from my organization, from what I have discussed working with customers, and how you can leverage the Agile principles and best practices in this field. Let me quickly talk through some examples of, focuses on AI. For many decades, AI-enabled solutions have been there, like in our day-to-day life. In some cases, we didn't even notice that it was there. The majority of the big tech sort of firms were the ones leading the way and creating a competitive advantage over more traditional organizations. However, companies of all sizes these days are implementing some sort of AI, machine learning, or cognitive technologies. Some of the efforts are focused on developing like intelligent devices, like this amazing LG washing machine with the AI DD motor that makes intelligent base laundry a reality by leveraging big data and recognize the fabric softness so they can apply the optimal washing pattern. And yes, I bought myself one that I operate with my iPhone. I only use the same program because I don't know really how it works. But yeah, it's interesting just to see how AI is already in a sort of domestic appliance and in many others. Other examples are more like internally focused. So if you look into an organization, it's more around the process-oriented activities. So perhaps looking into augmenting an existing process, or perhaps automating somewhat inefficient tasks. And there are examples of solutions. For example, if you think around document analysis, where there's an element of information extraction from lots of documents, a classification task, and categorizing them into buckets. So with intent of like helping professionals or helping people within the organization find the right information at the right time. And there are examples, for example, within insurance claims, where people reach out to you with a specific question, and being able to find examples and similar documents or things like that, so you can provide a better advice to your clients. It's very important. And yet there are other initiatives that are focused more on the typical conversational sort of interfaces. And I guess we have all sort of come across the Siri and Alexas of the world. So I guess it's probably it's not wrong saying that every single sector has already been transformed by the adoption of AI for the products, services, or for the internal processes. And I was looking into the this year's McKinsey global survey on artificial intelligence. Oh, sorry, I can hear. Is there something? Sorry, I heard some background noise. Is anybody wanting to? Oh, okay. Please let me know if you're not seeing the screens or something is going wrong. Because right now I don't see the camera, and I might just be talking to myself, which happens. Yes, sorry. Going back to the McKinsey survey on artificial intelligence, basically what it was good to sort of review is that it's suggesting that organizations are already using AI as a tool for generating value. And when we talk about value, more increasingly, the organizations see value coming in forms of revenues, which is really great. There was a small sort of percentage of respondents that were attributing about, I think it was about 20% of the organization's earnings, and that would be for interest, tax, etc., to AI. So that's really good that they're already kind of trying to capture the investment and how how the return is. However, well, there are companies that obviously have sort of now invested even more in AI as a response to COVID-19, and they have been forced to accelerate their transformation to all things digital. Companies that fallen behind, they are at risk of, like, again, that gap getting bigger and not being competitive anymore. So, I mean, I had plenty of conversations with customers and with other professionals in various events and forums that I've been attending for the past couple of years within my own organization and other practitioners in the field, just to understand what kind of challenges sort of people have observed across different projects that are more like focused on like AI enabling solutions. And there are few, there are lots more. But if I could sort of point out the few ones that I keep hearing constantly across different initiatives, one is around the data in itself and data acquisition. Many companies already have tons of amazing data. They have been capturing data for decades now. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that one, the data is accessible by the project team that's going to be working on a sort of a solution, and also that it may not be in a format that they need to be able to be consumed by the models that they are developing. In many instances, they have to even acquire the data from other organizations or from the customers, which also implies into all these sort of legal contracts, non-confidential confidential agreements and so forth, and making sure that they also adhere to the sort of regulations. Like, for example, we had the GDPR here, but every country is different. So if you're doing the software development in another location, but you're storing the data elsewhere, all that kind of complexity comes up as a challenge and a bonus in terms of running a project. There is a massive human effort in most of the projects that I've been involved in, especially at the early stages, where you have a subset of a data set, and it requires a lot of sort of manual editing, tagging to make sure that it can be used. So the investment of that additional team working on that, in many cases, is not like plan, or it's not like expected, like, okay, I already gave you a data set, why are you not working with that? Why do we require to do more work on that? And I'm sorry, just gonna, my timer going up. Bias, we have also heard a lot that there is a lot of bias in data. This could be led by the way that data has been captured, for the past decades, or in the way that is sort of, transformed. And when you sort of get in data sets, they may not be representative of the population. So again, training a model or working on developing a model that has already bias in data, you end up with a bias model, which again, if you're using for making decisions on a field, it's pretty uncomfortable. I read recently that, particularly thinking about HR, they have been looking into AI to help making decisions on like performance reviews and ratings and salary increases. So how concerning is that if you have a bias in the model, how you're making sure that you're compensated correctly, you're making the right decisions at the point of doing the performance review. So again, how do we make sure that we remove that? It's an ongoing effort. Explainability. So this is a good topic that also we have an internal in our organization at the lab. So people feel uncomfortable with the typical sort of black box solutions that they have had to work with in the past. They get to work on something, they get us a result, and they don't really know how they came with that sort of result. What was the sort of thinking process? What was the decision process to get to that point? So these days we're looking into more explainability type of models, or like making sure that there is a trust component on it, to make sure that if you try and to adopt the solution as a user, you understand what is it that is doing, and therefore you feel comfortable complementing it to your process or like decision. Transferability sort of looks into this perception that, well, we have worked in a model with this particular sort of data set, and we could transfer it into the next thing. So again, we can quickly move it into another project, and often that's not the case. In many cases, it's very difficult to just, if you're using data from your customers, and then you're trying to use a subset of data like it's internal, you can't just simply transfer the algorithm to kind of perform in the same way. It may require different sort of tagging and different sort of pieces of work around it. So again, it's not as easy as reusing something very quickly. You need to be mindful of the data that it's involved and how it can be transferred, which kind of leads to some problems around estimating effort and budgeting. When I discuss with my team, and I've discussed with other colleagues of mine in the industry around how do you estimate data science projects, is super hard, because it depends on all these variables and others, and you can't just say it's going to be a 5-story point type of thing. I mean, you have to estimate more into the t-shirt size and type of thing, and again, not every project is comparable, so you can't just say based on my learnings from this project is a large. So it's really hard to estimate, and it's really hard then to kind of say this is the budget that we're going to require and how we're going to build a business case for that. There are like plenty of examples where, again, incrementally we're trying to tackle that and use that as a learning mechanism to kind of say that, well, maybe this project will require this sort of investment, but it's still very hard. Other problems that we have heard are around adoption, particularly from the customer perspective, and especially incremental adoption. When we think about AI enabling solutions, or like more around like machine learning type of models that are still learning, going to a customer and saying, how do we sort of introduce this product that's still kind of learning from your data and will only get better as consumes more of your data, and they feel a little bit uncomfortable with like, okay, so I'm going to introduce in this, which means that I have to change a little bit of the ways that we work and the processes, etc. But it's still not perfect, so I still need to supervise what it's doing. Well, it's the whole point of it. It's going to cost me a lot to kind of get into that change. So we see a lot of resistance from customers into like this incremental sort of adoption of AI-enabled solutions. Some companies, as we mentioned, McKinsey has mentioned that some organizations have already been able to kind of attribute the value on, from the investment on AI, but not every organization has been able to do so, because again, it's very difficult to kind of pay into, well, this project was this investment, plus the additional investment, and it led to this. So it's still quite difficult for some organizations to evaluate what's the return on investment. So with these challenges, I mean, a lot of people kind of saying that you can't really like implement the traditional, well, now traditional sort of agile ways of working, the agile sort of life cycle. It's not like software development in itself, and the kind of methodologies and approaches out there don't really fit. I guess everybody has an opinion, and that's fine. And I understand that when it comes to thinking what's the deliverable for an agile project is challenging. Sometimes it's not a fully fledged product or service. Sometimes it's just a model. So I understand that agile methodologies are a challenge. However, I like to see the challenge as well. Let's try to sort of inspect it a little bit more, and let's see within, at a high level, the principles, the values, and the best practices that we know of. How can they help run these type of projects in a more effective way? Let me pause there for a second to get a sip of water. So let me move into, probably you have already seen this diagram before from Gartner, that combines design thinking, lean startup, and agile sort of frameworks all together. And some people talk about it as a linear thing. I don't believe in that. I think that everything connects to each other, but it's really important to think about, first of all, like with anything else, even in an AI sort of a problem, you need to understand what's the problem that you're trying to solve. And here's where the design thinking is really, really good at helping at that. Applying techniques to try to understand what is the problem rather than trying to solutionize, refrain again, what's the question that we're trying to resolve with data, and work collaboratively with people and customers trying to ideate different potential solutions. You can apply lean startup. You could say that, you know, it's a little bit of the agile at smaller scale, but the point here is around, let's try to define different experiments that help us understand what is the problem, how can we check the problem, what data do we need, how we're going to go about it. Can we, from this information, try to build something very, very small that help us measure and evaluate what is targeting the question, what is answering the question, what's the next level of thing that we can sort of implement. So experimentation is crucial, creating prototypes or small proof of concepts that you get out there with users, with internal teams, with whoever, with people, with product, to see whether it's doing the right thing. And that should help kind of inform the next stages. Let me move on to another methodology, and this is the cross-industry standard process for data mining, and I'm surprised that I remember the whole acronym. And it's a life cycle sort of methodology used more for data science approach, right? So it's looking into 6 phases of, you know, the sort of data life cycle, but I see those phases more stages trying to answer a particular question. So again, this very same model is already looking into what is it that we're trying to do, what's the business need, what's the business problem, so I can start thinking about, do we have data to help answer that question from the business, or do we need to get data, or is the data clean, as in, do we need to transform it to make it like readable, etc. How do we organize the data for modeling, and what kind of different models and techniques are out there, what's the state of the art, what is in like research, could we try something and experiment with them, and again, identify what evaluation models you're going to have, how you're going to be testing that, deploy something small. And usually when I discuss this, I add an additional arrow there, because even when you deploy something, there's a feedback mechanism. We do a lot of testing. People do a lot of testing as well to kind of see how it's performing, and it's a constant evaluation. So just because you have released a solution, it doesn't mean that there aren't changes coming back. That could again lead to, you know, the previous sort of questions, even back to the original question of, what is it that we're trying to do? What's the actual problem here? So I try to combine it. So looking back at the diagram and the sort of the crisp DM approach, with design thinking, it's the same sort of phase around, you know, the business understanding, trying to understand what's the question that the business is trying to resolve here, or what's the question from the customer point of view. do we truly understand the pain points? Do we understand the motivations here, the frustrations? Where do they envisage themselves in the future? And with that information, as we try to define the experiments, it's where the data scientists and also the engineers in our team start looking into what's the data that we're going to need for doing that, the preparation, and what kind of techniques we're going to try to sort of implement here. And that again, as a small experiment, small deliverables, you test, you evaluate, you share the feedback. So with those learnings, you help inform the next stages. So we talk about deployment. When we talk about deployment of a model, the discussion that we have with our colleagues across the segments is that we're already helping you form your product backlog. We have already helped you inform what you're going to need in more detail. Again, what sort of changes into the architecture or like in the platform, whether we're going to be in the cloud or what we're going to be doing, how we're going to operate. We're already helping you kind of de-risk all those questions whenever you start the project in more sort of a structured and organized way. So I see this as a fantastic opportunity to sort of, again, combine all the methodologies to kind of help the agile process to be more effective. And these areas here, they also implement back here. So you have your product backlog, but again, you try to build something small through your sprints, right? So you have something that you ship out there that you put in front of the customers, hopefully, and you still evaluate. So you can obviously go back at any point and saying, I was still delivering the right thing. Is this still relevant? How do we adopt it? How do we change it? What mechanisms do we have to implement to making sure that is still relevant? So for me, I'm very comfortable thinking that, well, there will be more details around how teams implement like AI DevOps and all these sort of things. But at a high level, when we're having the conversations with customers, when we're having the conversations with senior directors, yes, you can run all these type of projects in an agile sort of approach. And thinking about the relevance and how it links back to the Agile Manifesto, there are other four like practices that I would like to sort of discuss. So thinking about individuals and interactions. So what you see there is my version of the alien baby from Agile PM. So I've used this diagram, this as a tool like forever to kind of have the conversations around the people that we need to have involved in these conversations and these projects. It's important to identify not only the roles of who makes the decisions, but also the expertise that we need, the skills that we need, and how we're going to be handling the conversations. I believe that you're probably familiar with this and with Agile PM, and if not, I would like strongly recommend that you check it out on the website so you actually see like the diagram, because again, this is my adaptation that kind of fits the lab sort of organization, but just to kind of touch on the different sort of roles that you see there. The orange-like ones represent the sort of business interest. Green ones are more like the technical sides. The blue one is more like process-oriented, and then we have all the supporting roles. At the project level, again, you still need people that will help us drive the project and make the decisions, champion, see how the project kind of fits with the strategy of the organization, not only from the business side, but also from the technical perspective. And then what we call the innovation team that will bring data scientists, UX, which is, we use like the UX and the research and ongoing sort of testing throughout the project, so not just at the beginning, and engineering teams. And we identify the business ambassador who's going to be giving us a little bit of the confidence that we're heading on the right direction. But we also added like another role. We identify the value of another role. This is from an example of a project that we call it the editorial ambassador, because we work with editorial teams. But often I refer to it as well as the data ambassador. And that is pretty much like the data owner. So it could be someone within the organization, if it's like, if that's where the data comes from. But if it's someone from the customer side, just making sure that we have someone embedded into the whole sort of innovation team that can give us a little bit more insight of how you have, why the data is structured this way, what was the thinking, and questions around how you've tagged it, etc., etc., etc. And again, we bring advisors from multiple areas of the organization to make sure that we have greater visibility of, from the business side. We involve like proposition teams, sales, etc. And other technical teams. So this is no different from other sort of agile projects that we have run. It's just that we have sort of tweaked the type of roles, just making sure that we have the right people working together and making sure that the communication is flowing. Thinking about working software and I call it working solutions as a mechanism to demonstrate progress. Again, going back to the experiments and how do we scope the experiments of these small prototypes, they all sort of focus on serving a specific need. So in this example, which I really like, we talk about it as in how do I commute from point A to B, and I want to be in the fastest way, I want it to be in the safest way, etc., etc., etc. But as we start with the project, we need to start with something very small, just to give it a sense that whether we can do it or not. Is it feasible or not? Can you commute on a skateboard? Maybe it's not safe, but you could. It's not the fastest, and actually you may need to you can't go on the road, you have to go on the pavement, or you can't even go on the pavement because pedestrians may be super upset. So every single POC that you scope is again trying to address the need, but trying to evaluate how you're doing it incrementally, iteratively, and delivering value to the point that you get into the full sort of solution. We even have at one point a golf cart. Don't ask me why. The customer collaboration, and this is really important. We know the customer collaboration is important. That's better than any sort of contract negotiation and stuff. Now, when it comes to this type of projects, and particularly when it comes to getting data from them, there's going to be some sort of contract somehow to make sure that we not only we protect ourselves, but we protect the customer, we protect their data, and they feel comfortable and safe sharing that data with us. There are many organizations that we work with, and from what I've seen as well, what I've heard in many forums, that data it's what makes them different, and it's their competitive advantage. So giving us the data to do a POC that we don't even know whether they would be successful or not, it's concerning because they don't know whether that's going to be a mechanism for us selling back a solution. So yes, you have to involve the customer throughout that process, not only to understanding the problem, making sure that they're part of how you ideate a solution that fits their needs, get them to help us test and evaluate what kind of changes do they have to implement to adopt the solution, what fears do they have along the process, and again, making them feel that they are part of the project, not just the ultimate sort of stakeholder that we consume it. They are part of the success of the project. And finally, respond to change, which again, we will hopefully do. I don't know why I see this kind of strange lines there. But yeah, we will hopefully do through testing and evaluation. If you target small POCs and you try to scope something that's very small and very contained, if you figure out something is not working fine, it's easier to kind of pivot into completely different model, algorithm, or even a completely different problem than trying to kind of do it at the end. And we all know this, and there are very different ways in which you can sort of evaluate the process, how the process is going, from just testing at the end of a POC, but also throughout ongoing user testing. We do things like A/B testing, where we have a very controlled sort of subset of customers that see a variation of how the product would look like if we integrated a model, and so forth. So again, I guess with all these kind of few slides that we have gone through, what I'm trying to say is that the Agile manifesto is still relevant. So this is, nothing is not just about the software. If we go a little bit more abstract and we think a little bit more about what is it that we're trying to resolve, what is it that we're trying to do, and how do we leverage these practices that we know that for years they have worked, and they will be complemented by other techniques, etc. They're still valuable, and we can still deliver the right thing at the right time, which to me it's kind of what it matters, right? I'm feeling that we can do it in a more controlled way. So I'm gonna pause it there because I've talked for a long time, and I would just like to kind of open it up for like, you guys to ask questions or to like, I don't know, let's have a chat about whether, if you have experience on this area, whether this resonates with you and so forth. I just want to kind of keep it as an open forum.
Thanks, Myriam. I have a few questions. We don't have any questions in the chat yet, so by all means, if you've got any questions for Myriam so far, pop them in the chat and we can read them out and kind of start this discussion. But certainly I have a question that could kick us off if possible. So you mentioned just before about ways of wanting to kind of get the customer involved so they're part of the project rather than just feeling like a stakeholder, perhaps. What are the best ways that you think are the kind of ways of going about that to kind of include a customer in the project?
So I'll give you examples of how we do it currently within the labs. So our organization, of course, they have their relationship managers, sales teams, etc., etc. So they already have like a subset of, customers segmented into different groups. We work very closely with them to understand whether they have previously expressed interest in different areas or what feedback they have shared. So we usually ask for an introduction to someone that represents the customer side to kind of, hi, we are the labs. We are trying to work on this area. We have heard that you have something that resonates with this problem. Are you comfortable having a chat? That doesn't sort of, you're not sort of linked to anything and you don't have to talk about anything that you're not comfortable. In some cases, they feel like, I would love to talk to you more about the problem, but I can't share details. So sometimes we have high level sort of non-disclosure agreements in place just to say that just because you're giving us some feedback, we're not going to be using it. This is just to protect you. Also to protect us, within the labs, we experiment a lot. So it's also our competitive advantage that some of the implementations that we have to protect them, and we just start with those conversations. Then we usually invite them for more like in-depth interviews, and we involve our UX team. They are really good at designing the workshops based on the type of customer, the segment area. So they will use different techniques to kind of create a workshop where they feel safe to communicate and also they feel heard, like my idea is this and that, and then we'll probe, but why do you feel about this idea? So this is where design thinking, we use a lot of design thinking at that stage. And as we start the project, we just try to keep communications open with them. If we need data from them, obviously we will go through the process of how do we do this in a safe sort of way. We share with them how we're going to structure the project, the different sort of points. We ask if there's anybody that they would like to work with us more closely. So we make them part of, the sprint planning conversations, the part of the demos and the testing. And sometimes they bring others from their organization to be part of the user testing sessions that have been, in many cases, like we create like experiments or we try to moderate them just to see how things perform. So they are throughout that process very working with us from the very beginning, which is really helpful because for us, one of the things that we have observed is that we can speak better the language of the customer. So they feel that yeah, you're representing the problem in the way that we understand, and two, they feel that they're contributing to the design of the solution. So again, sometimes we get this sort of, you are a co-design partner with us. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to go 100% the way that you want, because we have to look across the patch. But now we give you the opportunity to kind of influence how that product is going to look like, what's it going to do, and how it helps you. When we move more towards the actual sort of productionizing of the solution, some of them sign up as beta testers. So again, they're continuously involved into the testing of the product until it gets released. And then we may involve later on when we start looking into the go-to-market activities, how they migrate, etc. We don't necessarily do that in the labs, but at that point with those teams, they are already onboarded. They are excited and ready to adopt, which is really good.
That's awesome. Thanks, Myriam. Sounds super collaborative, which can only ever be a positive thing, as I think. So we've had a few more questions come through. So first one from Jade. Thank you, Jade. She asked, if your workplace isn't entirely on board with this agile way of working yet, do you have any recommendations on how to start including experimentation or testing?
That's a very good question. We try to avoid using the language that makes feel people that we are, trying to evangelize something, because sometimes it's not so much about, whether it's agile or whether it's lean or whatever. It's what practices can we do to help us resolve a particular problem. So, for example, the what I showed you earlier in terms of the alien baby was an example of, okay, we need to collaborate with all these many people across different roles in the organization, and usually we have the challenge of my role is this, and therefore my role in the project is that, and just using that as a tool to kind of have that conversation of, yeah, absolutely, you have this role in the organization and you do this and that. For the project, we need this type of role, and do you feel comfortable with that? And what else do you think you will need, or how you will need to be supported by? Because sometimes we think that that's a person, but it's actually a combination of the two. So we use some of the agile techniques, and I try to leverage as much as possible from the different sort of approaches and frameworks to kind of facilitate the conversation rather than saying we have to be agile, etc., etc. Thinking about the small prototypes or experimentation, basically the conversation is around, we just want to make sure that you don't end up investing tons of amount of money on something that's not going to work. Because we think that sometimes the solution is a machine learning sort of model. Sometimes it's just a redesign of the UI. We want to make sure that you know that from the very beginning, because the investment is completely different. You will implement different skill sets, different teams, etc., etc. So for us, it's more like we're trying to help you de-risk the project as early as possible. And every single experiment or POC is de-risking the next level of like uncertainty that we don't know. Sorry, does that help?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Jade, let us know in the chat if that's helped to answer your question. I thought that was a really thorough answer. We've had another question through from Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. He's asked, in the Agile PM approach, would some folk typically have multiple roles to fill out the roles needed? So this is going back to the alien baby graphic that you showed us. And I know some people call it a snowman, so I'll just...
Every time I call it something different. I have to say that sometimes I call, because I also like, people will see differently, and and we call it the space alien and lots of different things. And the thing that sort of talks about the roles and the interactions that we're going to have. Yes, I in many projects I've had examples where the project sponsor, the business sponsor, is the same as the visionary. And that has been absolutely fine. Or actually, it was someone that comes from the technical side and sticking more into that role. You may not need all the roles. We have projects that at early stages, so at very early stages of the POC, we don't even have engineering. We only have like a UX person and a data science lead, and we have someone from the business that may not be the ambassador at that point, but it's just helping us with the vision. So you may not have like a fully defined alien baby or snowman, but you can start plotting, using that to start plotting the roles that you've got, what else you're going to need. And also I use it a lot to have a conversation around what allocation do I need from people, particularly when they're not in our team. From the business ambassador side, if it's someone from product, they already have a day-to-day job. So when I'm asking them to be like sitting with us, helping us prioritize, helping us scope things, they go like, I only have an hour a week. So it helps us also. I use that as a tool to help the conversation around ideal allocation and how we're going to structure the conversation so we can sort of, avoid disrupting the day-to-day jobs, but we can move forward type of thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Myriam. We've had a few comments. So Jerome mentioned it's good to avoid the not invented here syndrome that you sometimes get. And Jade said, thank you, and love the idea of the de-risking ASAP once you'd answered her question. And Jerome, thank you for Jerome. You've popped in a question here just at the end. You've asked, do we need a business analyst role as well for these type of innovations?
We could, and I think we should in some cases. It's true that perhaps within the labs, we have used our sort of design leads within UX to sort of take a little bit of that role. But we always have the conversations when we're working with the product teams on account. If you have business analysts, we should involve them as early as possible throughout this process. So let's make sure that they're part of the design thinking process, like the conversations with customers, because then they are the ones helping put that sort of product roadmap together and defining what it would be the sprints, etc., etc. We have seen that there are certain segments that do not have that role. I have no idea why they were taken away. There's no reason why, truly. And I think it's because there's assumption that, we're trying to kind of, people can do different things. But I see the value of having an analyst role that understands not only from the customer side what's going on, but also how it integrates with, other products, how it integrates with our platforms is crucial. They have a particular skill that we really need in the project. They kind of help hinge things together. So for me, I would always recommend, yes, the same way that we said to product teams, do you have designers, do you have UX people from your side? Because it's going to be an ongoing question. We see that the very early stages, but you need to continue this conversation. It's a never ending conversation. You want to make sure that your product is always relevant. So yes, the answer to that is yes, in short.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Myriam, and thank you, Jerome, for the question. And Christopher's just commented here, great answer, thank you. I think that was for your answer before. I have one more question, if I may, Myriam, and I don't know if anyone else has got questions that they want to pop into the chat during this. I know near the beginning you mentioned about biases in data, and I thought that was really interesting. And I'm just wondering, is there kind of patterns in terms of biases that happen a lot that you've kind of noticed in your career, and kind of certain pitfalls that people can look out for? Or
yeah, that's a really good question. To be honest, I probably am not the most qualified to kind of give you a straight answer, but it's true that I have read a lot about industries, particularly thinking about the legal sector and more like, from judicial point of view, where there were discussions around how can we leverage AI to help us make a decision of whether a convict should go on parole or not. And the data that has been captured it's like very unfair for some minorities compared to others. So if you're training a model using that bias in the data, you are not going to be making the right decision if you're only using the solution for the decision-making process. There are also lots of conversations around using AI to kind of bridge the gap on gender equality and pay, etc., etc. But for many years, women haven't been even like recorded in the data. So there are plenty of books, and I could share with you lots of interesting reading, because data is missing a lot of stuff already. But the good thing is being able to recognize that that's missing, so we can make sure that we're not only making the models as fair as possible, but going back to the explainability piece that we talked about, make sure that we help the user understand how the process of making a decision, what was the process and what it came to that conclusion. So again, you're still the human making the decision. I mean, the machine or the model is not going to replace you. You're still the most intelligent thing, and that kind of process is to kind of help you speed up the decision-making process. But you need to be aware of, oh, it had this gap, maybe I should dig deeper on this thing before I make my final decision. So it's a well-known issue in the industry. I will be more than happy to share papers and really interesting books around that. And if I bring this up with my data scientist colleagues, I mean, seriously, that would be an entire good session to talk about it. It's important.
thank you, Myriam. Yeah, that would be really interesting. I think myself, sometimes I hear the word data and just immediately think it's prescriptive and will give me all the answers. So just kind of recognizing that bias just really stood out for me, and was a really interesting thought. So thank you for that. I can't see any other questions in the chat at the moment. So in that case, we'll kind of start to close up. So just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone that's joined today, and a huge thank you to Myriam for taking us through this session, and yeah, really insightful, really helpful, and just sparked really good conversation. Thank you, Christopher. I've seen you've just put excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate
much,
it.
Myriam. Just to let you know, you can stay in touch with us at the Agile Business Consortium if you want to be in touch with the latest kind of business agility news that we share. And we're actually at the moment prepping for our very first virtual conference, which we're going to be doing in October. So we would love to have you involved. Oh, I've just seen a quick question, if I may, from Barb. Thank you, Barb. She said, thanks a lot. Do you have an article or anything about the combination of approaches with crisp and agile?
Sure, there are a few examples, absolutely, and Forbes also has lots of really good reading materials around the combinations, the observed pitfalls on agile approaches, etc. So I would be happy. Shall I collect a few examples and share it back to you, Rachel, so we go back to this group with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have people's kind of contact details from this group, so happy to share if everyone would like that. That was yeah, thank you, Myriam. That would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Barb said that would be fantastic. So thank you very much for that, Barb. And lots of people have said yes, please. So that sounds like it was a good shout. Oh, and also excellent. Ian, thank you, Ian. He's quickly just said, can you also share material on bias and data sets, decision models as well?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you, Myriam.
And it's good to see you, Ian. I haven't seen you. Oh, this is great. No, I'm really glad to have had a chance to catch up with you guys. I hope that this was helpful with these topics. It could be like so in-depth details, and so if there's anything else that you guys feel like, oh, it would be really helpful to have a follow-up on something else, definitely reach out to Rachel and the rest of the team, and we can have something more tailored.
Absolutely, we can set that up. So yeah, do just let us know. And I believe my colleague Jade is just about to put a link in the chat, and that's just a little feedback link. So if you have some time, just let us know what you thought of this session, if there's anything we can improve on, because we have a few more sessions lined up for festival. And there it is, perfect timing. Thank you, Jade. So once again, just a huge thank you, Myriam. And a huge thank you to all of you